Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back. My name is Smitty and this is my booktube channel, Booksmitten. Last year, I made a point to read more short books. And in doing so, I think it helped me keep up a much more sustainable pace of reading. So for this video, I thought I would share my short book TBR, so let's get into it. The first category of books that I'll discuss are nonfiction works. First up is The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This book comes to be around 128 pages. Now, this was a recent release by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I loved her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And Gathering Moss is also on my TBR, but it's a bit longer than this one. This short book explores abundance and reciprocity in the natural world and looks to the serviceberry tree as a model for that. Now, on a personal note, I really enjoy serviceberry trees. I have one as a container tree on my balcony, and the birds just love them. Next up is What the Chicken Knows by Cy Montgomery. This book comes in at 91 pages. The premise of this book is that it's an intimate exploration of chickens that mixes science and personal anecdotes. Now, as an archaeologist, I'm definitely fascinated by the history, origins, and spread of chickens throughout the world, so I'm excited to see what I'll learn by reading this book. The next category is also a bit of nonfiction, but told through poetry. Now, I was introduced through all these works through Hiba Tahir and her channel Tightwires. If you haven't checked out Tightwires, I highly recommend it. Hiba brings on amazing authors of diverse works of fiction and nonfiction, and I find the interviews to be quite insightful. I'll make sure to link her channel below. First up is Black Box Name to Like Me by Mexican author Diana Garza Iles and translated by Cal Paul. This poetry collection questions motherhood, the future, memory, and our acquisition of language. This book comes in at around 207 pages. Now, there's a lot of white space in this book, and part of that is intentional. So that means that the book will not take what you might think a 207-page book might take to read, but I'm also excited to explore this play of structure and space within this book. Also, given that one of the themes is the acquisition of language, and this is a translated work, I'm really excited to see how that's pulled off. Next up is Saints of Little Faith by Megan Pinto. This collection of poetry comes in at 109 pages. This work explores South Asian experiences that are often overlooked and are things that people don't want to talk about, like addiction and domestic violence. After listening to Megan Pinto's interview on Tightwires and being of South Asian descent myself, I knew I wanted to read this book, and I'm excited to dive into it this year. So the next category of short books we're going to talk about are series. Now, sometimes series feel daunting because they can be extra long and you just don't know if you want to commit. So I was really curious to explore if there were short book series that if I enjoyed the first book, I would be excited to keep reading the rest of the series. First up is the Tea Dragon Trilogy by Kay O'Neill. Now, this is a middle grade graphic novel series, and the first book in the series, The Tea Dragon Society, comes in at around 73 pages. This series is set in a whimsical, inclusive world where we follow a young apprentice blacksmith who discovers the magical art of taking care of tea dragons. Some of the prominent themes in this book include forging new friendships, the value of tradition, creativity, and self-expression. Now, I came across this series because it was constantly on a list of books to read if you also liked Garlic, and that's Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch. I love those books, and I kept seeing this trilogy included on similar lists, so I wanted to check it out. Now, I've already bought all 3 books, so I'm excited to dive into them this year. Next up is the Singing Hills Cycle series by Nevo. Now, there will be 7 books in this series, and I honestly forgot how many have already been published, but the first book comes in at 128 pages. This is set in an Asian-inspired fantasy world. We follow the main protagonist, who is a non-binary cleric, and they've just discovered some artifacts and stories that help tell the secret history of an exiled empress. Now, there are a lot of elements to this book that had me gripped. Of course, there's the archaeology element with the artifacts, but also I'm really enjoying being immersed in diverse fantasy worlds. So I'm really hoping I like this first book and I continue with the rest of the series. Next up is a bit of a peculiar category because it's named after a publishing house series, but we're just going to call this category Storybook ND. Now, the backstory to this category is one of my favorite short books of all time is The English Understand Wool by Helena DeWitt. Now, the publishing house that published that book is New Direction. After doing a bit of research, I found out that it's part of a series called Storybook ND. Now, the goal of the series is to deliver the pleasure one felt as a child reading a marvelous book from cover to cover in an afternoon. So these are short books and they are advertised as such. So I went through the catalog and I selected a few titles that caught my eye that I'd like to read this year. First up is In the Act by Rachel Engels. This book comes in at 64 pages. It's a mashup of genres, so it's a bit of sci-fi, fantasy, and literary fiction. It's described as a highly improbable and hilariously believable tale of a wife's scorched earth rebellion. Count me in for that one. The next book is The Famous Magicians by Argentinian author Cesar Era and translated from Spanish by Chris Andrews. This book seems to be a classic Faustian bargain tale, and the description reads, "A writer is offered a devil's bargain. Will he give up reading books in exchange for total world domination?" I'm curious, so I want to read this book. The next category is just short fiction reads that I'd love to get to this year. First up is The Situationship by Abby Jimenez. This work comes in at 37 pages. It's a romance that follows travel nurse Maddie, who comes into this town and has a run-in with Doug, who's this kind-hearted farmer. And this is all due to a pig named Kevin Bacon, which that's a pretty hilarious name for a pig. Anyway, despite her plans to leave Minnesota, Maddie is reconsidering whether this fling she had with Doug might be something more. So it is a classic romance work, and I know Abby Jimenez is a prolific and popular romance author. I read one of her other short works and really enjoyed it, so I'm excited to try this one out. Last up is Direction of the Road by Ursula K. Le Guin. This work comes in at 19 pages. It originally was part of a short story collection, but now you can get it as a standalone. I love this author and I know there's a twist in the piece, so I really didn't want to read any more of the synopsis. And given that it's only 19 pages, I didn't feel that I needed to do a lot of background research to be invested in trying out this book. So those are the short books that I plan to read this year. If you have any short books that you're planning to read this year that I didn't discuss, please let me know below. I would love to keep curating this TBR. Now, if you're curious to see what else is on my TBR, I recently made a tag video that goes into some of my recent finds that I hope to read pretty soon, so I'll link that video here. That's all for this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.